Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. On New Year's Eve, we got the Bellator versus Rizin co-promotion fight card. And while this was supposed to be the biggest Bellator and Rizin fight card of 2022, I believe both promotions made a massive mistake in regards to the promotion of this fight card. We're going to talk about that in this video. And also, when I tweeted out that I believed Bellator and Rizin made a massive mistake regarding this fight card, I got a response from Big John McCarthy, and also Josh Thompson chimed in a bit too. We're going to look at their responses a little bit later in the video, but I wanted to make a video about this because this is something that's not really getting covered too much. I've talked about it a bit on a couple live streams, so I figured now's the perfect time to make a video about it. And also in this video, because it kind of fits in with this video, and this is a question I've been asked time and time again, I'm going to answer the question: will the UFC ever do a co-promotion fight card with another MMA organization, whether it be Bellator, whether it be One Championship, whether it be Rizin? We're also going to talk about that in this video. So the mistake that Bellator and Rizin made when having this fight card, they got their best fighters, the Bellator's best fighters versus Rizin's best fighters. This is supposed to be a massive fight card. They got AJ McKee on the card. They got Pitbull on the card. They got Archuleta on the card. This is supposed to be one of their biggest fight cards of the year. And what they decided to do was to air this fight card on a tape delay. And what that means, in case anybody out there doesn't know what that means, essentially they record the fight card at a different time and then they air it in prime time in the United States. So in this case, I don't remember the exact timing, but essentially what they did is they recorded the Bellator versus Rizin fight card around 6 a.m. Eastern time, and then they aired it in the United States around 8 p.m. Eastern time. So essentially, by the time the actual fight card comes around and you can watch it live in the United States, you already know all the results if you follow MMA at all. And I think this is a massive mistake because in no sport do people want to watch a pre-recorded, anything. They don't want to watch pre-recorded football. Is there anybody out there? Let me know in the comments. Even if you miss a big football game, do you DVR it and go back and watch the entire football game? Or do you catch the 3 minutes of highlights that air on ESPN or SportsCenter later in that day? Because the whole fun in sports, whether it be basketball, MLB, NFL, MMA, whatever you want to say, the whole fun of watching a sport is watching it live. Otherwise, it diminishes the value of the product. And it sucks all the hype out of it. So I think it was a huge mistake. They have it happen live early in the morning, East Coast time, and then they air it and pretend it's live at night, because that's another thing that nobody really mentioned. Showtime is tweeting out, and I'll put it up on the screen, the main card fights, including the main event, will air live on Showtime on Saturday, December 31st at 8 p.m. Eastern time. First off, that's just misrepresenting it. So you're pretending it's live now when it's really not, because we all know the results already. Unless you completely avoid a computer, you're gonna find out all the results of all these fights because it already happened. And now they're pretending it's live. So I think it's a massive mistake. I think their ratings will show that. I bet you, even though this was some of the best Bellator fighters they have to offer, some of the best Rizin fighters they have to offer, I bet you not a lot of people tuned in prime time on New Year's Eve. I mean, seriously, do they really expect people to spend their New Year's Eve watching pre-recorded fights? Pre-recorded fights that, unless you did some massive rearranging of avoiding online and not talking to anyone, now you know the results because you follow MMA in general. I just think it was a terrible mistake, and I think it was completely egregious, and I tweeted that out, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about what I tweeted and the response I got back from Big John McCarthy. But what I wanted to say before I get into all that, and I'm going to talk about the UFC doing a co-promotion, there was an easy solution to this problem. Japan is 12 hours ahead of the United States East Coast time. They could have easily had, because I know some people are going to say, well, they're having the live event for the Japan audience, so they're not going to have them come at a weird time just so they can air the event live in the United States. They could have had an easy solution to that. Because they're 12 hours ahead of us, they could have done it in the afternoon in Japan, let's say 11 a.m., 12 p.m., in the afternoon, 1 p.m., and then they could have had it at maybe 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the United States East Coast time, and people would have still tuned in. Even airing at 2 a.m. East Coast time, that is 11 p.m. West Coast time. And people stay up till 2, 3 a.m. watching UFC fights all the time. So have it in the afternoon for the live crowd in Japan and have it air late, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., around that period of time in the United States so people can watch it. Because if you're just going to pre-record it, nobody's going to watch it. And then you have to go through all these different steps. If you want to wake up at, 5, 6 a.m., they make it where it's basically impossible to watch it anyway. You got to get a VPN. People aren't going to want to do that. And I think their ratings will reflect that. Now, before we get into exactly what I tweeted out, I want to answer a question that I've been asked time and time again. Will the UFC ever do a co-promotion with Bellator, One Championship, Rizin, any other promotion you want to name? The answer to that question is no, it will never happen. And the reason for that is not that the UFC is scared. Obviously, if they had a co-promotion and UFC fighters lost, because Bellator ended up going 5-0 against Rizin, so I bet you Rizin regrets doing this co-promotion because now it kind of diminishes their fighters' skill sets, even if that's not necessarily the case. But the reason the UFC will never do this is because they have nothing to gain. Even if they go out there, let's say they have 5 UFC fighters versus 5 Bellator fighters, and they win every single fight, they're not gaining anything. The reason Rizin and Bellator decide to co-promote is they're hoping they can gain fans from, Rizin may have fans that don't watch Bellator. Bellator may have fans that don't watch Rizin, and they're hoping to combine those fan bases. Anybody that watches Bellator, anyone that watches Rizin, you can be damn sure they watch the UFC already. So the UFC has nothing to gain. These promotions, even though I think people shit on them a little bit too much in regards to fighter skill sets, I think there's a lot of elite fighters in some of these other promotions. I just think the UFC's talent pool is much deeper, and the UFC is just an unbelievable, massive promotion. They're basically, a comparison between the UFC and Bellator is a comparison between NFL and Canadian Football League. That's the truth. People care about UFC. There's people who strictly watch the UFC and don't watch, whether it be PFL, One, Bellator, they just don't watch them. And every single one of their fans, Bellator's, PFL's, One, every single one of them watch the UFC. So unless we get to a space where they're more 50-50, the UFC will never do a co-promotion with another organization because it would be a one-sided affair because only that organization would benefit from that co-promotion. Now, in terms of the little Twitter battle that I had with Big John McCarthy and Josh Thompson, which I don't really want to call it a Twitter battle. I think that sounds kind of corny. But I tweeted out that Bellator and Rizin both deserve criticism for airing their card via tape delay in the United States. Truly, nobody wants to watch that knowing damn well it's not live. Just doing my duty, and I tagged Big John McCarthy and Josh Thompson by covering Bellator today. And that's an inside joke, which I'll talk about in a second. I'll fill you in a second. But Big John McCarthy responded and quoted my tweet. And he said, "So you're blaming Bellator and or Rizin for putting a show on US TV at a delayed time when the actual time of the event in Japan makes it to where it's on at 5 a.m. East Coast and 2 a.m. Pacific Coast. Tough crowd." Well, to answer your question, Big John McCarthy, that is exactly what I'm doing. Because you could have picked a different time in Japan. You could have aired it a little bit earlier and then had it a little bit earlier East Coast time. Nobody wants to watch a pre-recorded fight card. It is never going to happen. People do not want to watch that. It ruins all the hype. Nobody's ever going to want to watch it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm going to want to check out the fights. I haven't even checked them out yet. I'm going to want to check out the fights just to see, how they looked, how AJ McKee looked, how Pitbull looked. But I'm not rushing to do it. I'm one of the most hardcore MMA fans there is. And I'm not rushing out there to do it. I'm not wasting my New Year's Eve watching pre-recorded fights that I already know the results to. It ruins all the fun. So then Josh Thompson kind of chimed in because somebody responded to my tweet because they saw my tweet and said non-live sports does not work with internet. And I agree with this guy 100%, this guy named Adam. Josh Thompson then responds to that. If you weren't addicted to social media, then it wouldn't be a big deal, but you develop such a bad habit of being on it that you can't control yourself to stay off of it. That's the real issue. So let me get this straight. Josh Thompson and Big John McCarthy, or mainly Josh Thompson in this case, in this specific instance, is saying, you know what? It's not Bellator or Rizin's decision that we're giving you a pre-recorded fight card and pretending it's live. But what we're doing is, it's your fault because you can't not look at your phone for a 14-hour period because you don't want to get spoiled in results. So you have to give up your phone. You can't talk to your family. You can't talk to your friends. You can't look and see what's going on in the world of news, in the world of MMA news, because Bellator and Rizin, the B leagues of MMA, is having a pre-recorded fight card. And I am sympathetic to this. I do understand that sometimes logistics are hard in terms of, okay, well, they got the live crowd there. But in 2022, now 2023, I don't think there's any room in space, for a pre-recorded sport. If it's not live, people are not going to want to watch. And the reason I tweeted this out to begin with, and I was going to put the clip in here, but I'm probably not going to do it because who knows, they might copyright strike me. On the Weighing In podcast that Big John McCarthy and Josh Thompson do, they went out there and said, essentially, I don't want to put words in their mouth, and I'll put the clip down below and I'll give you a timestamp since I'm not putting it in here. But essentially what they said is it's the MMA media's job to promote the shit out of this card. And essentially what he's saying is the reason that Bellator or Rizin or any of these other organizations are not as big as the UFC is because the MMA media doesn't cover it as much as they cover the UFC because they're scared of the UFC. That's essentially what he's saying. And I just think when you're going to lobby that criticism, and again, I'll put the clip down below in the description, you can go find it, and then you're going to have a tape-delayed fight card, what media is going to then want to cover it live or suppose it live when it's pre-recorded? They're not going to get the level of attention they would if it was actually a live fight card in the United States. And again, that's Bellator's main audience. They want to appeal to the United States MMA fans. That's what they want. That's their market. And to have a card that already happened, that you can already find the results on online, is just not going to help you in terms of ratings. And as far as Big John and Josh Thompson, what this shows me, tough crowd. You want to watch fights live? Tough crowd. Big John McCarthy and Josh Thompson, who have the Weighing In podcast, essentially what they like to pretend is, oh, we're independent MMA media and we have real opinions. We're not scared of the UFC, the big bad UFC and Dana White. But what they are is they are shills for Bellator. They cannot accept any criticism of Bellator, of Showtime. They just can't accept it because they are paid by Bellator. Their checks are signed from Bellator or Showtime. And they just can't stand to see anybody criticize it. They have this inherent bias against the UFC. All they do is throw criticism at the UFC. And don't get me wrong, there's criticism to be had about the UFC. I talk about it all the time on this channel. But Big John McCarthy, where my problem is, they like to pretend they're independent. They like to think, nobody's in our pockets. We're giving our true opinions. No, you are a clown. You are a shill for Bellator, and you would never be able to admit that Bellator made a mistake here. And that's why you're acting to say, well, you're addicted to social media. That's why you couldn't not see the results for 14 hours. No, this is 2022, now 2023. If you think people are just not going to be connected to the internet because a B-League fight promotion decide to have a tape delay card, I mean, seriously, where are you living? Are you living in the 1980s? I mean, we have the internet. Of course we're going to see the results. Of course we're going to check online. We follow MMA. We follow the sport. We want to know. So I think it's a massive mistake by Bellator. I think it's a massive mistake by Rizin. I think they could have had a bigger audience. I think the ratings will reflect this. I think the ratings for this card will be atrocious. And I think Big John McCarthy and Josh Thompson, because they're getting a paycheck from them, that they just can't see that this was a genuine mistake and it was a terrible decision by whoever made it. I'm assuming they came together and made this decision. I think this was egregious. I think, many MMA fans would have tuned in live had there been live fights, but instead it was pre-recorded. And these guys, don't ever listen to them in terms of any Bellator coverage because it's always going to be biased. They are Bellator mouthpieces, And that's all they're going to do is hype up Bellator, shit on the UFC. Their opinions cannot be trusted. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Am I absolutely crazy, or am I accurate in my assessment of this? Let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.